In his influential work, The Era of Emptiness, originally L'ère du vide, French philosopher Gilles Lipovetsky explores the rise of individualism in modern societies and its profound impact on culture, values, and identity. Published in the mid-1980s, this book offers a penetrating analysis of what he calls the postmodern condition, where traditional structures, religion, politics, and collective ideologies lose their central role, leaving individuals to construct meaning on their own. Lipovetsky argues that contemporary life is no longer defined by grand narratives or collective struggles, but by a culture of personal choice, consumption, and self-expression. On the surface, this shift seems liberating. Individuals are freer than ever to design their lives according to their desires. Yet beneath this freedom lies a paradox, a growing sense of emptiness, loneliness, and disconnection. Through his sharp reflections, Lipovetsky examines how advertising, fashion, entertainment, and consumerism shape our identities, often replacing depth with superficiality. He shows how the decline of traditional authority has not led to greater fulfillment, but instead to a culture of lightness, where values are fluid and commitments fragile. This book summary will guide you through Lipovetsky's key insights, helping us understand the challenges of modern individualism and the psychological costs of living in a society obsessed with novelty, pleasure, and self-centered pursuits. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who are passionate about philosophy, culture, and self-development. Your support helps us continue bringing you profound summaries of thought-provoking books. Now, let's begin exploring the Era of Emptiness and discover how Lipovetsky unpacks the contradictions of modern life. Chapter 1. The Rise of Individualism. Gilles Lipovetsky opens The Era of Emptiness by examining the historical transition from a society centered on collective values to one dominated by individual freedom. For centuries, human life was organized around strong institutions, religion, family, tradition, and community. These provided people with a sense of belonging, direction, and moral certainty. But with the arrival of modernity and later postmodernity, these structures began to dissolve, giving birth to what Lipovetsky calls hyper-individualism. Unlike the revolutionary movements of the past that demanded collective action and social transformation, the new era places the individual at the center of existence. People are no longer primarily defined by their roles within institutions, but by their personal choices, lifestyles, and desires. Freedom, once tied to political struggle or liberation from oppression, is now understood as the freedom to design one's identity and pursue self-fulfillment. On the surface, this appears to be a remarkable achievement. Individuals can express themselves more openly, break away from rigid traditions, and live lives that reflect their unique aspirations. However, Lipovetsky warns that this new individualism is accompanied by a subtle and troubling consequence, a growing sense of emptiness. Why? Because when traditional anchors disappear, individuals are left without stable frameworks to guide their lives. The focus shifts toward consumption, fashion, and entertainment, which offer temporary satisfaction but fail to provide lasting meaning. This creates a paradoxical situation. People are freer than ever, yet they often feel directionless, anxious, and unfulfilled. Lipovetsky describes this as the lightness of being in postmodern society. Commitments become fragile, values fluid, and identities fragmented. The pursuit of personal happiness replaces collective ideals, yet it does not resolve the deeper hunger for purpose. In this first chapter, Lipovetsky sets the stage for his central argument. Modern individualism, while liberating, also introduces a cultural vacuum, an era of emptiness that shapes how we experience ourselves and the world around us. Chapter 2: Consumer Culture and the Illusion of Fulfillment. In the second major theme of The Era of Emptiness, Gilles Lipovetsky turns his attention to the central role of consumerism in shaping modern identity. With the decline of traditional authorities, religion, family hierarchies, and political ideologies, consumer culture has stepped in as the dominant force guiding daily life. Shopping malls, advertising campaigns, and mass entertainment no longer simply provide products, they provide symbols of identity and belonging. The brand one wears, the gadgets one owns, the vacations one takes. These become the markers of selfhood in a society where individual choice is celebrated above all else. Lipovetsky argues that consumption has become a kind of new religion, offering rituals of desire and satisfaction. Yet unlike traditional religions, which promised stability, transcendence, and meaning, consumerism thrives on constant change and novelty. Fashion seasons shift rapidly, technology becomes obsolete in months, and trends fade as quickly as they appear. The result is a cycle of endless pursuit, where satisfaction is always temporary and the promise of happiness is continually deferred. At the heart of this process is what Lipovetsky calls the illusion of fulfillment. Advertisements and media images promise that a new purchase, a new style, or a new experience will bring happiness. And while these do bring fleeting pleasure, they rarely provide lasting contentment. Instead, individuals are drawn deeper into a cycle of desire, consumption, and disappointment. This dynamic creates a paradox. Modern individuals are surrounded by unprecedented abundance, yet many feel a persistent sense of emptiness. They enjoy comfort and choice, but without deeper anchors of meaning, consumption becomes a substitute for purpose. Lipovetsky notes that this consumer-driven identity is not purely negative. It allows for creativity, self-expression, and personal freedom, but it also risks reducing life to surfaces, appearances, and possessions. In this way, consumer culture both empowers and imprisons the individual, offering freedom of choice while subtly dictating what should be desired. In this chapter, Lipovetsky paints consumerism not as mere economics, but as the cultural logic of postmodernity, a system that shapes how people think, feel, and define themselves in the age of emptiness. Chapter 3: Media, Entertainment, and the Shaping of Identity. In this part of the Era of Emptiness, Gilles Lipovetsky turns his focus to the extraordinary rise of media and entertainment in postmodern society. With television, advertising, cinema, and later digital technologies dominating daily life, individuals are constantly immersed in images, narratives, and spectacles that subtly shape their desires and self-understanding. Lipovetsky argues that media has replaced traditional institutions as the main storyteller of modern life, where religion once provided myths and moral frameworks, and where political ideologies once offered visions of collective destiny. Media now fills the gap with entertainment, celebrity culture, and advertising fantasies. These stories are not designed to cultivate depth or long-term meaning, but to capture attention and encourage consumption. The result is what Lipovetsky calls a culture of lightness and superficiality. Identities are increasingly built not on enduring commitments, but on fleeting trends and media-driven ideals. A person's sense of self may be tied to the music they listen to, the shows they watch, or the influencers they follow, markers that shift rapidly with cultural currents. This saturation of media also creates a paradox. On one hand, it democratizes self-expression, offering individuals endless images and lifestyles to emulate or reinvent. On the other, it creates a culture of comparison and performance, where people measure themselves against carefully constructed media images that are often unrealistic. The gap between reality and representation fuels anxiety, dissatisfaction, and a sense of inadequacy. Lipovetsky emphasizes that entertainment culture encourages a mindset of distraction rather than reflection. Instead of confronting deeper questions about purpose, mortality, or moral responsibility, individuals are swept up in the endless flow of amusement, novelty, and spectacle. The pursuit of fun becomes the dominant mode of existence, while serious engagement with life's ultimate concerns recedes into the background. Yet Lipovetsky does not present media only as a destructive force. He acknowledges its role in spreading diversity, creativity, and freedom of expression. The challenge, however, lies in the balance. When entertainment becomes the primary lens through which reality is experienced, it risks reinforcing the very emptiness that defines the postmodern condition. In this chapter, Lipovetsky shows how media and entertainment have become central engines of identity in contemporary society, shaping not only what we consume, but also how we think, feel, and relate to ourselves and others. Chapter 4: Social Disintegration and the Isolated Individual. In this stage of his analysis, Gilles Lipovetsky examines the decline of traditional social bonds and the rise of the isolated individual in postmodern society. As institutions such as family, community, and religion lose their binding power, individuals find themselves increasingly disconnected from shared identities and collective responsibilities. Lipovetsky argues that the modern emphasis on personal autonomy has led to a profound weakening of social cohesion. Relationships are no longer primarily structured by duty, obligation, or tradition, but by personal preference and emotional satisfaction. Marriages, friendships, and communities become more fragile, as they are sustained only as long as they fulfill individual desires. When they no longer do, they're easily abandoned. This results in what Lipovetsky calls a society of flexible connections. On one hand, this flexibility allows people to reinvent themselves, escape oppressive structures, and pursue self-expression. On the other, it produces a world in which commitments are shallow and long-term solidarity is rare. The individual becomes freer, but also lonelier. Lipovetsky highlights that this social disintegration does not necessarily manifest as outright conflict or chaos, but rather as indifference. People may coexist peacefully, but they feel less bound to one another. Civic participation declines, political ideologies lose their appeal, and communal rituals fade. What remains is a culture of individual pursuit with little sense of collective destiny. The rise of this isolated individual is further amplified by consumer culture and media. People turn to shopping, entertainment, and digital experiences as substitutes for deeper human connection. Yet these substitutes often fail to provide the intimacy and solidarity that traditional communities once offered. Lipovetsky suggests that this trend contributes to the psychological malaise of modern life. Despite unprecedented freedoms and comforts, many individuals report feelings of emptiness, alienation, and rootlessness. They are unanchored, navigating a world without the guiding frameworks that once gave structure to existence. Still, he does not present this entirely negatively. The decline of rigid hierarchies and oppressive traditions also means that individuals are free to construct new forms of belonging and identity. The challenge, however, is that these new forms must be actively created rather than inherited, which places a heavy burden on the individual. In this chapter, Lipovetsky captures the essence of the postmodern paradox. The individual is more autonomous than ever before, yet also more isolated, fragile, and uncertain about their place in the world.
Chapter 5: The Pursuit of Pleasure and the Cult of the Present. In this section, Gilles Lipovetsky explores how the postmodern individual, faced with the decline of traditional values and collective narratives, turns increasingly toward the pursuit of pleasure and immediate gratification as substitutes for deeper meaning. Lipovetsky observes that in earlier societies, life was structured around long-term commitments, religious devotion, family obligations, political causes, or communal projects. These commitments required sacrifice, patience, and endurance. In contrast, the postmodern era elevates the here and now. Happiness is sought not in transcendent ideals or long-term struggles, but in the intensity of the present moment. This cultural shift manifests in multiple ways. The rise of leisure industries, travel, and entertainment designed to maximize enjoyment, the growing obsession with lifestyle, beauty, and personal well-being as central measures of fulfillment, the emphasis on experiences, concerts, parties, festivals, social media moments that provide immediate excitement, even if temporary. Lipovetsky does not deny that these developments bring joy and liberation. The ability to enjoy life's pleasures without guilt represents a genuine historical achievement. However, he warns that the cult of the present carries risks. By focusing so heavily on short-term gratification, individuals may neglect the deeper and more enduring dimensions of life: purpose, responsibility, and legacy. Moreover, this pursuit often generates frustration. Pleasures are fleeting by nature, and the more they are consumed, the more they lose their intensity. This leads to a cycle of constant novelty seeking, where satisfaction is always pursued but rarely sustained. Lipovetsky highlights another paradox. While people are freer to enjoy themselves than ever before, this freedom does not always translate into genuine happiness. Instead, it can produce a restless search for stimulation, an inability to find contentment in stillness, and a pervasive sense of emptiness once the excitement fades. Yet he also suggests that the pursuit of pleasure is not inherently shallow. It reflects a fundamental human need for joy and vitality. The challenge, however, is to balance pleasure with depth, to integrate the enjoyment of the present with commitments that give life coherence and meaning. In this chapter, Lipovetsky captures the defining mood of postmodern culture, a civilization intoxicated by the present, liberated from the weight of tradition, yet haunted by the question of whether endless pleasure can truly replace enduring purpose.
Chapter 6: Postmodern Politics and the Decline of Grand Ideologies. In this chapter, Gilles Lipovetsky examines the political consequences of the postmodern condition. Just as traditional social bonds and cultural frameworks have eroded, so too have the grand political ideologies that once mobilized entire societies and gave individuals a sense of collective purpose. During much of the 19th and 20th centuries, political life was dominated by powerful narratives: liberalism, socialism, communism, nationalism, and other ideological movements that offered sweeping visions of society and the future. These ideologies demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and long-term commitment. They promised redemption, justice, or progress through political struggle. Lipovetsky argues that in the postmodern era, these grand narratives have lost much of their appeal. Citizens no longer rally around revolutionary dreams or utopian visions. Instead, politics becomes more pragmatic, fragmented, and individualized. People are more interested in specific issues: economic stability, healthcare, education, personal freedoms, than in subscribing to a totalizing worldview. This transformation produces what Lipovetsky calls a cool politics. Politics without passion, where debates are less about ultimate values and more about technical solutions and managerial efficiency. Political engagement becomes thinner, voter turnout declines, and ideological fervor gives way to consumer-like behavior, where citizens treat politics as another service to evaluate rather than a cause to fight for. The decline of ideology also mirrors the broader cultural shift toward relativism and pluralism. With no single truth commanding universal respect, politics becomes a marketplace of competing interests rather than a battlefield of opposing worldviews. On one hand, this reduces violent conflict and ideological extremism. On the other, it weakens collective mobilization and leaves citizens with a sense of disconnection from political life. Lipovetsky highlights the paradox at the heart of postmodern politics. People demand greater personal freedoms and protections, yet they are increasingly unwilling to commit to political movements that require sacrifice or long-term dedication. Politics becomes a spectator activity, consumed through media coverage and social commentary, rather than a deeply lived collective struggle. Furthermore, the media-driven nature of contemporary politics amplifies this trend. Political leaders are judged less by the coherence of their ideology and more by their charisma, communication style, and ability to respond quickly to shifting public moods. In this sense, politics takes on characteristics of entertainment, further blurring the line between civic responsibility and consumer culture. Ultimately, Lipovetsky sees this decline of ideological politics as both liberating and troubling. It frees individuals from oppressive dogmas and destructive fanaticism, yet it leaves societies vulnerable to apathy, disconnection, and the erosion of democratic vitality. The challenge of the postmodern era, therefore, is to reinvent political life in a way that reconciles personal autonomy with meaningful collective engagement.
Chapter 7: Consumerism and Emptiness as a Cultural Identity. In this chapter, Gilles Lipovetsky turns to one of the central features of postmodern life, the culture of consumption. He argues that consumerism has become more than just an economic system. It is now a cultural identity, shaping how individuals see themselves and how societies function. Unlike earlier eras where status was derived from family heritage, social class, or religious devotion, in postmodern societies, identity is increasingly defined through what one consumes. Fashion, technology, entertainment, travel, and lifestyle choices all serve as signals of individuality and success. People no longer simply purchase goods, they construct themselves through consumption. Lipovetsky stresses that this culture of consumption is not merely about material needs, but about symbols and emotions. Products and brands promise happiness, beauty, prestige, or a sense of belonging. Shopping malls, advertisements, and digital platforms create an environment where consuming is equated with living fully. To buy is to be. However, this consumer-driven identity has a dark side. The constant pursuit of novelty produces a cycle of desire and disappointment. New products bring temporary excitement, but satisfaction quickly fades, leading individuals to seek the next purchase, the next trend, the next experience. This endless cycle feeds a sense of emptiness, as the promises of consumerism rarely deliver lasting fulfillment. Lipovetsky highlights the paradox of the consumer age. While people have more choices and freedoms than ever before, they often feel trapped in a shallow existence where value is measured by possessions and appearances rather than depth of character or collective meaning. Moreover, consumerism weakens traditional cultural and moral frameworks. Instead of deriving meaning from shared rituals, spiritual beliefs, or historical legacies, people turn to the marketplace for identity. This results in what Lipovetsky calls a light culture, a culture of surfaces, images, and styles, where everything is temporary, replaceable, and designed for instant appeal. At the same time, consumerism reinforces the individualization of society. By encouraging personal choice and self-expression through goods, it fosters a sense of autonomy. Yet this autonomy is paradoxical. It is mediated and shaped by corporate marketing, global trends, and media influences, leaving individuals feeling free but subtly manipulated. Lipovetsky does not claim consumerism is wholly negative. It democratizes access to comfort and pleasure, breaks down rigid social hierarchies, and allows people to reinvent themselves. But it also produces a cultural environment where emptiness becomes normalized, where depth and permanence are replaced by constant flux and superficial satisfaction. In this way, consumerism is not just an economic activity, it is the cultural DNA of postmodern society, simultaneously liberating and alienating, empowering and hollow.
Chapter 8: Technology, Media, and the Acceleration of Modern Life. In this chapter, Gilles Lipovetsky turns his attention to the role of technology and media in shaping the postmodern condition. He argues that technological innovation, coupled with the rise of mass and digital media, has not only transformed how people live and communicate, but has also fundamentally altered the experience of time and existence in contemporary society. The defining feature of this transformation is acceleration. New technologies allow information, communication, and consumption to flow at unprecedented speeds. What once took days or weeks can now be accomplished in seconds. The rhythm of modern life is increasingly compressed, creating a culture of immediacy, where patience, slowness, and long-term perspective are eroded. Lipovetsky highlights how the media amplifies this acceleration. News cycles are faster, trends emerge and disappear overnight, and attention spans shrink in the constant bombardment of images, messages, and updates. The result is a society caught in a state of perpetual distraction, where the new continually displaces the old before it has had time to mature. This has profound psychological and cultural consequences. On one hand, technology and media empower individuals by expanding access to knowledge, entertainment, and connection. They allow for greater autonomy, creativity, and participation in global networks. On the other hand, they foster restlessness and anxiety as people feel compelled to keep up with the relentless pace of change. Lipovetsky suggests that this culture of acceleration reinforces the postmodern emphasis on the present moment. With the future uncertain and the past rapidly fading into irrelevance, individuals focus increasingly on immediate experiences. Technology feeds into the pursuit of instant gratification, whether through online shopping, streaming entertainment, or social media validation. At the same time, media creates a world of hyper-reality. Images, symbols, and digital representations blur the boundaries between reality and fiction, between private life and public spectacle. Life becomes increasingly mediated, with individuals curating identities and experiences for display, often at the expense of authenticity. Yet Lipovetsky avoids a purely dystopian view. He acknowledges that technology and media provide new opportunities for self-expression, education, and connection across boundaries that were once insurmountable. The challenge, however, lies in resisting the shallowness and exhaustion that come with constant acceleration. Without balance, the very tools that expand freedom risk deepening the sense of emptiness at the heart of postmodern existence. In this chapter, Lipovetsky paints a vivid picture of a civilization racing forward at full speed, empowered by technology, captivated by media, but struggling to find depth, meaning, and rest within the endless acceleration of modern life.
Chapter 9: The New Moral Individualism and Personal Responsibility. In this chapter, Gilles Lipovetsky examines a surprising outcome of the postmodern condition, the rise of a new form of moral individualism. While earlier sections of his work emphasize the weakening of traditional values and collective frameworks, here he shows that morality has not disappeared altogether. Instead, it has been reconfigured around the autonomous individual and their responsibility to themselves and others. Unlike the rigid hierarchical moral codes of the past, rooted in religion, authority, or communal obligation, postmodern morality is flexible, personalized, and subjective. It does not rely on absolute commandments, but on individual conscience, empathy, and situational judgment. People are encouraged to think for themselves, decide what feels right, and act according to personal principles rather than externally imposed rules. This moral individualism is most visible in areas such as human rights and equality, where individuals are called to respect the dignity of others regardless of background. Environmental responsibility, where personal lifestyle choices, recycling, sustainable consumption, ecological awareness are seen as moral acts. Health and well-being, where individuals take responsibility for caring for their own bodies and minds as a form of ethical duty. Lipovetsky stresses that this does not mean morality has become weaker. On the contrary, many postmodern individuals feel deeply committed to causes such as humanitarian aid, animal rights, gender equality, and climate change. However, the difference lies in how these commitments are experienced, less as a collective obligation imposed from above, and more as a personal, voluntary choice. This shift brings both promise and fragility. On one hand, it reflects a world where individuals are freer to define their own ethical lives and to align their actions with values of compassion, tolerance, and autonomy. On the other hand, it risks becoming unstable, as moral responsibility is only as strong as each person's personal conviction. Without shared frameworks, morality can become inconsistent, fragmented, and vulnerable to indifference. Lipovetsky also highlights a paradox. While people are increasingly guided by values of care and responsibility, this morality often coexists with the culture of consumerism, entertainment, and superficiality. A person may passionately support social justice or environmental causes, while simultaneously participating in lifestyles that contradict those values. In this sense, postmodern moral individualism embodies both sincerity and contradiction. It reveals a genuine human desire to act ethically in a fragmented world, but it also demonstrates the difficulty of sustaining coherent moral frameworks in a culture dominated by individualism and instant gratification. Ultimately, Lipovetsky presents this new moral landscape as an attempt to fill the vacuum left by the decline of traditional authorities. In place of rigid commandments, there emerges a flexible, self-guided morality, fragile yet necessary, that reflects the challenges of navigating freedom, responsibility, and meaning in the postmodern era.
Conclusion: The paradoxes of the era of emptiness and its future possibilities. In his conclusion, Gilles Lipovetsky brings together the central themes of the era of emptiness to highlight the paradoxes that define postmodern society. Far from offering a single linear narrative of decline, he presents a nuanced picture of a civilization caught between liberation and disorientation, autonomy and emptiness, progress and fragility. The first paradox lies in the realm of freedom. Postmodern individuals enjoy unprecedented autonomy in shaping their identities, lifestyles, and choices. They are no longer bound by rigid hierarchies, traditions, or ideologies. Yet this freedom often comes at the cost of disconnection, loneliness, and the absence of stable meaning. The self is free, but it is also unanchored. The second paradox is found in consumer culture. It has democratized access to comfort, beauty, and self-expression, making life more pleasurable and diverse. Yet, its promises of fulfillment are fleeting, producing cycles of desire and dissatisfaction that feed the very emptiness it tries to mask. A third paradox emerges in the realm of politics. The decline of grand ideologies has spared societies from destructive fanaticism and ideological wars. At the same time, it has weakened civic engagement and left citizens disenchanted with democratic life, reducing politics to managerial pragmatism and media spectacle. Lipovetsky also highlights the paradox of technology and media. They connect individuals across the globe, open access to knowledge, and multiply opportunities for creativity. Yet they accelerate life to an exhausting pace, blur the boundaries between reality and simulation, and foster constant distraction rather than depth. Despite these contradictions, Lipovetsky does not paint an entirely pessimistic picture. He insists that the era of emptiness is not merely an era of decline, but also one of possibilities. By loosening the grip of oppressive traditions and ideologies, postmodernity has created space for new forms of morality, responsibility, and solidarity, albeit fragile and self-guided. The future, according to Lipovetsky, depends on whether societies can find ways to balance individual autonomy with collective meaning, pleasure with depth, freedom with responsibility. The challenge is to transform emptiness into openness, to turn the absence of fixed frameworks into an opportunity for creativity, empathy, and the reinvention of cultural life. In closing, Lipovetsky suggests that the era of emptiness should not be read only as a warning, but also as a diagnosis of our condition. By recognizing its paradoxes, individuals and societies may find the clarity needed to navigate its challenges and to imagine futures beyond mere consumption and superficiality. The message of the book, then, is double-edged. We live in a time of unprecedented liberation, but also in a time haunted by fragility. Whether this emptiness leads to despair or renewal depends on how we choose to inhabit it. If you enjoyed this summary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves books as much as you do.